Thank you, Michigan. Thank you. Let me start by thanking Michigan for what you delivered. It is such a privilege to be here with you tonight, so let me just start with my standard disclaimer, because I'm not an attorney, so I just got to say this, because I'll get my ass suit off. These comments are mine and mine alone and don't represent that of the President of the Administration, just to be clear, okay? So I'm going to talk to you as if we're off the record so I can be truthful, because that's what I do. I like to be truthful. But before I start, I just want to thank, obviously, the Michigan Trump Republicans who delivered big in Michigan. Thank you. And the Michigan Conservative Coalition. Thank you both very, very much. You know, I could take you back to the first time I met Donald Trump, back in April of 2014, at an event not too dissimilar to this one. It was in Manchester, New Hampshire. And I partnered with a guy by the name of David Bossie, who was famous for a very famous court case called Citizen United. And Dave Bossie and I had planned something called the Freedom Summits. And we're going to bring candidates up to New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Iowa, and ask them to start talking about what their messages would be if they decide to run for office. And at the time, we had a pretty good lineup. We had Ted Cruz, and I think we had Marco, and I think we had Rick Perry, and probably another 8 or 9 candidates. And Dave said, hey, let's invite Donald Trump. I said, nah, I just want serious candidates. This is April of 2014, April 12th. And he said, no, I think we should have Mr. Trump come up. I said, okay, let's do it. But everyone's got 11 minutes, and that's all they get, and we're going to keep moving with the program. So Donald Trump flies in on a Sikorsky, his giant helicopter, and he lands it, which is a pretty bold move. And shows up, and I say, Mr. Trump, it's nice to meet you. I'm the MC of this event, and you've got 11 minutes to speak, and there'll be a flashing red light when it's time for you to stop. So about 40 minutes into the program, Donald Trump's flashing red light had been going for about 34 minutes at this point. They just kept on talking. And there's room about 600 conservative leaders that day in the state of New Hampshire. And 2 things happened that day. It was the first time that we recognized Donald Trump said 2 very important things which became the hallmarks of our campaign. And I thought I was kind of smart about politics and been doing this a long time because I have no tangible skills. So that's what I do. And Donald Trump said, we're going to build a fence on the southern border. We're going to build a fence. For the first time I ever heard somebody talk about that. But then he said something at the end of his speech, and you go back and look at it. That day in Manchester, New Hampshire in 2014 of April, he said, we need to do something. We need to do something very quickly. We need to make America great again. Yeah. Now, some of the people in this room, don't lie to me, supported some of the other candidates, the losers we call them, right? Rand's a good man, but he didn't win. You know that. He's a good guy. But what Donald Trump saw, and what I had the privilege of being part of, was something that he talks about often, which was, it wasn't about Donald Trump. This was a movement about a country who wanted to take it back to prove once again it was okay to be an American. That we are the greatest country in the world. For 8 long years, we were on the global apology tour, right? We had to go around and apologize to everyone for being the greatest superpower ever known to man. We had to go and have our leaders bow to other leaders for a show of respect, which was not a show of respect, it was a show of disrespect. We had a military who had to apologize for going out and trying to do their job. We had a leader in the White House prior to this one who thought it was okay to have illegal immigrants come across our border and kill American citizens and not do anything about it. Look where we have come in 1 year. Let me just remind you what this president has been able to achieve in the first year of his administration. And we don't even need to talk about the economy and how it's absolutely crushed it, and we're going to grow at 4 or 5%, and he's passed the largest tax decrease in our nation's history. We don't have to talk about that. We don't have to talk about the fact that Donald Trump got no credit for getting Neil Gorsuch into the U.S. Senate in the first 125 days of his administration. We don't have to talk about the fact that they have gotten more justices approved in the first term of a presidential administration than any president in the history of our country. What we have to talk about is the respect that the United States has once again. This president has traveled overseas, and his trips to Saudi Arabia and Israel and Poland, they welcomed him with open arms. They didn't say, we want you to be apologetic. And do you remember what he did when he went to these places? He said, you better start paying your fair share because we're all done. He said the United States is not going to keep putting money into a failed United Nations, and Germany refuses to do so. And just 2 weeks ago, we saw the United States is going to cut their contribution to the United Nations. Thank you very much for saving taxpayer money. And all the geniuses, we call them, all the political pundits, throughout the entire campaign who said we were never a real campaign, this is all a marketing gimmick to have Donald Trump go and be successful afterwards. Let me tell you something, the guy was already successful. This wasn't like Crooked H, who had to make money after she left, right? Donald Trump had all the money he ever wanted getting into politics. And I remember I had the privilege of going to see him in New York in January of 2015, and I walked into his office on the 26th floor overlooking Central Park, and I sat in front of him and he said to me, man, you're a good-looking guy. I said, thank you. That's a pretty high compliment. And then he said, why do you think you can be my campaign manager? And I said, well, I don't think you're going to run. So, no, it's not a problem. And he said, what do you think my odds of running and winning are? And I said, 5%. And he looked at me, and he said, I think they're 10%. And he said, let's negotiate, 7.5. And I said, yes, sir. And then he proceeded to tell me about the tools that he had already built. The airplanes and the helicopters, the military tools that he had ready for a battle that was coming. A battle that we were going to take directly to the American people. See, we had an advantage. Unlike Mitt Romney and others, we didn't hide from his wealth. We embraced it. Because that's the American dream. People aspire and desire to be wealthy and rich and make a better life, not just them, but for their families and for the next generation. And what we embraced in the campaign was the wealth that Donald Trump had made to show people that we are the greatest country in the world, and through hard work and dedication, you can have the same type of success that Donald Trump has had. And the American people saw that, and it resonated with them. He wasn't apologetic to be worth billions of dollars. We embraced it. We took that big, beautiful 757 and we put it in front of every camera we could. You remember it. We went out and we talked about all the properties that Donald Trump owned, and we filed the largest personal financial disclosure statement in the history of a candidate for office. And then we get into the campaign. 2 years ago yesterday, I'm sure you guys don't remember this, but 2 years ago yesterday was the greatest day of Ted Cruz's life. He won the Iowa caucus. It was all downhill from there, Ted. Look, I was blessed to stand shoulder to shoulder, side to side with Donald Trump for almost 2 years running his campaign. And then after the Iowa caucus, where we finished second, and to him, second as the first loser, even though there were 15 people in the race and we were never supposed to win. We went to New Hampshire and we won by 19 points over John Kasich. Then we went to South Carolina and we destroyed Marco Rubio. Then we went to Nevada and we won 38 primaries and caucuses and got more votes than any candidate in the history of the Republican Party, including Eisenhower, who won World War II. News, right? They said he's still not a real candidate. And we're going to have a contested convention. And Donald Trump can't win the general election against the Clinton cabal. And if you remember the Clinton cabal, right? These guys are unbelievable. Let me tell you, just to give you an understanding of the size of the Clinton team compared to the Trump team. Hillary Clinton had 800 people that worked in her Brooklyn office. 800. To put a tweet out, it went through 15 different individuals to make sure it was correct. Us, bing, out the door, okay? Not so much. We started with 5 of us, and we grew to 200 people. That's how big our campaign was when we finished. There were 250 people on the entire presidential campaign on paid staff on election night. Think of that. I mean, it's a phenomenal statistic. But look, the campaign is now over and it's time to govern. And what we saw today, with the release of a memo from the House Intelligence Committee, if you don't think the deep state is real, you better put your head on straight, because it is real. And there are people who want to see the end of this president as quickly as possible. And we have seen individuals who went to the White House and said, please don't release this memo, it's going to make us look badly. Okay? 99% of the people who work at the FBI are phenomenal people and deserve our respect. But Jim Comey is a bad guy. Let me just tell you about Jim, okay? This is a man who has admitted that he has given out information which he obtained while he was the director of the FBI to a law professor to make sure that information was put public. Okay, that's a felony under FBI rules. He hasn't been prosecuted yet. This is the same man who has admitted that he's lied to Congress. We call that perjury in the real world, and has not been prosecuted yet. And then we've got McCabe, who signed the FISA warrant to spy on a U.S. citizen on domestic soil based on the false dossier that was paid for by the Clinton campaign and put together by a former MI6 special agent and didn't disclose the information to a FISA court judge. Those people need to be prosecuted under the full extent of the law. We need to be resolved in our fight. We're 1/4 of the way through the first term of this administration. We have probably the smallest number of individuals serving right now in the government in recent memory. And that part of that is because the president likes to run things like a business, to make people do more things and hold them more accountable. And look, I've been highly critical of some of the decisions the administration has made. And we saw a big change from when Reince Priebus was there to where General John Kelly is there. But we have a long way to go, okay? We have a long way to go. The tax cuts were a great first step for us, and we are so thankful. People are seeing it today in their paychecks. February 1st, it is finally kicking in. But there's a lot more to do. We need to get a transportation infrastructure spending bill done. And the president has proposed $1.5 trillion to make that happen via both public and private partnerships. It is something that should receive bipartisan support. But the Democrats have no interest in seeing the president get an election victory. They see no election year victory, which this year is. They see no interest in reforming a broken immigration system. Here's what the president proposed. It's very simple. Okay? I live in a little town in New Hampshire. You know what I got around my house? Called a fence. Maybe you heard of them. Okay? I know nobody else has one around their house, but I happen to have one. Here's what the president said. We're a sovereign nation. We need to put a wall up on our southern border so we know who comes into our country. Okay? To make sure that our individuals The people who are here, our residents, are protected from people who are coming into this country illegally. Seems pretty logical. That's not a Democrat or Republican idea. That's an American idea. Then he said, we're going to end sanctuary cities. Because if you're a criminal, you can't live in a city that allows that to happen. We're going to end chain migration. And this broken visa lottery system, I'm going to go to something crazy. You know what it's going to be called? A merit-based system. Which means if you're the best and you're the brightest and we need you to fill a role in this country, we give you the privilege of being a resident of this great country. And the media goes up in arms. We can't do that. You're going to put grandma out on the street. No. Grandma's welcome to come, as everybody else is, through the proper channels, like all of us did through some time in our past. But it's not an open border system anymore. We're going to do what is best for America, just like Canada does, just like Australia does, and just like so many other countries in the world does, that they take care of themselves first. That's what we need to do. So look, I had the privilege on Monday of spending some time with the President before the State of the Union speech. He was in a great mood. He was very happy. I saw Vice President Pence and had dinner with him on Monday night. They feel so good about the direction of where our country is going. The changes that they have made in such a short period of time have been so monumental that we can't appreciate them on the day-to-day basis. Let me just talk about the fight against ISIS. And let me remind you of what Barack Obama said about ISIS. He said, it is a generational problem that we can't solve. You know what this administration has done under General Mattis and John Kelly and Donald Trump? 98% of the territory that ISIS held 1 year ago has been taken back by our military. Taking care of our military has become a priority of this administration, including a broken VA system. And the President pledged, and I was there when we did it, he's followed through on it, that if you are a veteran, you can seek health care anywhere you want that accepts federal dollars, because that's the right thing to do. You shouldn't have to wait for the VA to be available to you. They did that early on. And so here we are. We're at a precipice because 33 members of the Republican House have announced they're either retiring or seeking election to a different office. That means the House of Representatives in Congress, if the Democrats win 25 seats, will be taken over by Nancy Pelosi and Gerald Nadler. And what that also means is, and kid yourselves not, they will immediately begin to move the impeachment proceedings against the President of the United States. And they will completely stymie the President's agenda for the next 2 years. And if you look at where the U.S. Senate is right now, there are 35 U.S. senators up for re-election, 25 which are Democrats. 10 of those Democrats are sitting in states that Donald Trump won in the 2016 cycle. We need to go and send the President some help. Because crying Chuck isn't going to help us. We know that. What we know is they want to do everything they can to stop the President's agenda. And he continues to fight. But look, we get some bad hombres in the Republican Party too. Maybe you heard of this guy, Jeff Flake, right? Or Ben Sass, right? We got these guys that have put an R next to their name. They get elected saying they're going to go and be conservative. Then they come to Washington, D.C., and they're an obstacle and an obstinate to the President, and they don't vote to support his agenda, which is the repeal and replace of Obamacare.
Fake Republicans!
We need to make sure we're sending good people to Washington, and we have to be very, very concerned about where the election cycle is going this year. So, let me say, I've had the privilege of standing and sitting next to the President, the First Family. I know them all exceptionally well. I'm going to close with this story because I think it's so appropriate of where our country is. So the president is sworn in on January 20th of last year, and I have this amazing privilege to sit on the podium in the same platform where the swearing in actually takes place. And look, I'm a kid from Lowell, Massachusetts, who grew up poor with nothing, and this is how great this country is. I'm sitting there realizing that a friend of mine, and I mean that with all the respect I can, is now the President of the United States. And about 3 weeks goes by, and the President calls me, and it's a very unique way when he and I have a conversation. It's a very candid conversation usually, and I answered the phone, and it was the White House, and they said, we have a secure call from the President of the United States. Do you have time? I said, yes, I do. And he says, Cory. I said, yes, Mr. President. And he says, would you come over to the White House to see me? And I said, of course I will, sir. So I go to the White House, and he had been in office for about a week or 10 days, and I went into where the Oval Office is, and outside the Oval Office, there's like this threshold. It's imaginary, but there's a you just don't cross over, right? Because that's the room where world decisions and people's lives have been changed throughout the course of almost our nation's history. I'd never stepped foot in that room. And I stood outside the room, and the president was sitting behind the Resolute desk. And to his far right, which would have been my far left, as I looked inside the room, the Vice President of the United States was seated there. And I stood outside, and I just stood outside the threshold, and he looked at me. And he said, get in here. And I said, yes, sir. And I walked forward, and he said to Mike Pence, he said, Mike, do you know who this is? And Mike looked at me, and he looked at the president. He says, yes, sir, that's Cory. I know who that is. And he said, Mike, do you know who this is? He asked him a second time. And the vice president stood from his seat, and he said, yes, sir, it's Cory Lewandowski. I know exactly who that is. And he said, Mike, this is the guy who said you could become the Vice President of the United States. And I said, well, with all due respect, sir, I think 60 million people said that, but thank you. And Mike stood up as he was standing, and he looked at me, and he said, Cory, on behalf of my country and my family, I thank you. And would you please take my seat? And I said, Mr. Vice President, I cannot do that. I cannot do that, sir. I'm sorry. I'll sit next to you. And I sat there directly in front of the president, who's behind the Resolute desk, and the vice president's to my immediate left. And we talked for 15 or 20 minutes, and then the vice president turned to me, and he said, Cory, I need to ask you a favor. And I said, Mr. Vice President, anything you need? He said, I have to make a speech tonight, and I want to make sure I represent our country and the president appropriately. Will you bow your head and pray with me? And look, I'm a pretty humble guy, grew up with nothing. And I sat at that Resolute desk and put my head down. The president put his head down. The vice president prayed for the strength of God to give him the ability to represent our country. And he finished, and I put my head up, and the vice president then stood up and thanked us. And I was so humbled by that moment, because that's the type of leadership we have in our country. And then, in the fashion that only I know, because I know the president so very well, as Mike stood up, he said, now get the hell out of here, Mike. And the vice president left the room, and I spent a few more minutes with the president. And then I left the room, and it's a memory that I will never forget. Knowing that of all the sacrifices the president made, and I made, and you made, to change this country, for our children and our grandchildren, and for the future that we need to have, to be unapologetic, to be the greatest country in the world, it is something that I look back on, and knowing of all the birthdays I missed and basketball games and swim meets and everything else for my kids, I look back and know I wouldn't give one thing to change it. Because what we're doing here is so important. And if it wasn't for you and what you did and the faith you had and the belief you had and the phone calls you made and the doors you knocked, we would have Hillary Clinton as our 45th president. So on behalf of me and my family, and I know my friend, the President of the United States, I want to come here and say thank you very much for all you've done. It has been my true privilege and honor. Thank you so much.